A turkey is not like a deer. You don't really have that same dynamic of, are the turkeys moving? Because they're always moving. I'm going to get as close as I possibly can to him. And the reason is, I want him to fly down and come check me out before he gets to those hens. To be honest with you, turkeys aren't that smart. They're wary. They're not very smart. You've either got to have a strutter or a jake to kind of cue on that dominance, or you need no decoy at all. If he's really hot, he's going to get to a point where he's just going to blow up and strut and almost become a zombie. I don't think it's a skill. I don't think it's something you got to get better at. It's just something you have to experience. This is Locke Wheeler with Scree Gear, T3 Calls, and Strutcast, and you're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Put down your latte and pull on your boots.
I've been blessed to harvest 22 of the 29 North American animals with my bow.
My personal 24-hour record for death threats is 88.
They will start putting two and two together and realize this is how you call bulls in.
So when I go hunting now, that's the ethos I take with me. Whatever this hunt is going to throw at you, you pull your big girl pants up and you get on with it.
Giant bucks are freaking awesome. They're beautiful. But you know what? I would not trade this first buck for anything in the world.
So I'm a geek. Magicians and dragons and magic swords. I shit you not, man. I'm the biggest dork in the gun business.
I'm Freddie Hartice, Hollywood Hunter.
This is Aaron Snyder.
Hey, this is Trevin Stoltzfus with Outback Outdoors.
This is Rihanna Carey.
Hi, this is John Stallone of the Interviews with the Hunting Masters.
You're listening to The Wild Initiative.
Hey, y'all, welcome to another episode of The Wild Initiative, part of the Waypoint Outdoor Collective. All right, so getting on to today's episode. Y'all may remember back in episode 92, I talked with my good buddy Locke Wheeler, had him on to really give an intro, everything you need to know to get into turkey hunting. And we got some really good info in that episode. Well, I have not had too much luck turkey hunting since then. I've run into some situations that I just really didn't know how to address. So I had Locke back on. We're in the middle of turkey season here to really, I guess, give some more intermediate advice for turkey hunting. So make sure y'all check this one out. If you haven't listened to episode 92, I'd recommend going back and checking that one out first. Hope y'all enjoy me talking turkey with Locke. Awesome, man. So turkey season here in California, at least, officially started the other day. I started 2 days after turkey season did because I was looking at last year's season dates instead of this year's. But yeah, so turkey season has officially started. And, I know we talked about it a little bit after the podcast last time, but I remember you were saying, okay, after you get out and you put this stuff to use, we need to sit back down again and see how it worked out for you. And last year's turkey season was not exactly very successful because I was still working full time and had to spend the entire month down in the desert. So I got about 4 days in. Getting into it, and really, we talked about a lot of the basics and stuff like that. And, if folks want to hear that, they can head back over to thewildinitiative.com. But we can get right into it. Just starting out, when does your season start out there in Louisiana?
So the Louisiana youth season was last weekend, March 27th, 28th, and the full season opener is this weekend. And Mississippi, since I'm right here on the border, actually Mississippi opened in the middle of March. So I've actually already been hunting for 3 weeks.
Okay. So how's the season been treating you for the past 3 weeks?
Well, one of the things to make note of, I guess, is that this year it has gotten springtime weather-wise much, much earlier than the last several years. I know I've made note to myself the last several years, it has stayed pretty cool and kind of late winterish all the way really to like April. And this year, the first part of March, it was already getting green and it's been warm. So from that perspective, the weather has been good. We've had a lot of really spring-like days. As far as hunting goes, it's been, I would just say average. It's not been without any action. I haven't actually killed a bird. I haven't hunted much. I've really just been hunting with my son. And with everything going on in our nation right now with coronavirus, I haven't made any of my early season trips, and honestly wondering if I'm going to make any trips. So I'm kind of relegated to hunting just a couple of pieces of property here. Well, so far, and now right here in Louisiana, and I don't have a ton of turkeys. I've got enough to hunt. We've got some birds, but it's been a little bit difficult. Early season's always difficult because for the states that open up early, even though it's deep south and it's warm and the spring is ahead on the calendar, the turkeys are still very bunched up in terms of there's not a lot of hens nesting, and so they're staying with the hens all day in a lot of cases, and that makes hunting real difficult. They're not nearly as eager to come to a call, much the way you hunt a rutting deer. They're not searching. They have their harem of hens, and those hens aren't venturing off and nesting. So that's made hunting difficult. Gobbling is kind of pretty much just early in the morning when they first fly down, they'll gobble for a while, and then they're off with their hens. So I've had a few exciting mornings, but it's been pretty average for the most part so far.
Yeah, I got out the other day, and I only got to sit for a little bit. It was just more a trial run. I got out a little bit late and had some calls, and it was definitely a mediocre experience. I sat down and I called a couple of hens in, and they came hauling ass in. I made a few calls, and they came running in, and they looked at my decoys, and I guess my strutting Jake decoy was not tempting enough for them to stick around. It was, that poor decoy got curbed pretty hard, but yeah. So you were talking a little bit about the seasons. How do you generally see obviously we're used to hunting turkeys in the spring, and how do the seasons and the changes in weather tend to affect the turkey's behavior?
Well, it honestly, it really varies on location, and I mean that not just regionally, but actual, from one farm to the next. It's how many turkeys you have in an area plays a big role in how their behavior varies and how they're affected by everything, weather being one of the big parts. It's the traditional thought is, when things are blooming and you have cooler temperatures in the morning, but warmer overall temperatures are your best days. I find, just like everything else, really every other outdoor activity, high pressure days tend to be the best, as far as gobbling and just the audible, your ability to find turkeys that way. A turkey is not like a deer in that a deer will bed up during the day, at various times throughout the day and the night. A turkey is pretty much on the ground during daylight hours. And so you don't really have that same dynamic of, are the turkeys moving, quote unquote, because they're always moving. They're always on the ground. They're either in a tree or on the ground. And I guess they may perch for periods of time, but I don't think, at least in my experience, is there ever really a situation where, well, the turkeys are all just sitting around on a limb somewhere. I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, but in my experience, I don't think that happens. So what you're talking about right there is like really how well are the turkeys, responding, and how well are they talking and responding to you, gobbling, and that sort of thing. And part of that, I think, is with the warmer weather, when you start getting some of that understory growth and greening up, it gives the type of habitat development where the hens can nest. And so, of course, you can get more hens starting to kind of venture off on their own, get away from the gobblers, and try to lay a nest. And that makes the gobblers more active because they're out searching for more hens. So it's kind of difficult. I spent the majority of my earlier years kind of thinking if it was cold and windy and rainy that there's really wasn't a lot of reason to hunt. But lately, I've kind of found that sometimes when you get these cool spring days, it can actually make them really gobble hard. And I don't really know what to attribute that to. I don't know if it's just typically cooler days are associated with high pressure fronts, and that in and of itself is, the fish bite better on high pressure, the deer move better in high pressure, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. But, just typically when you start seeing the woods green up, the flowers bloom, and you start having those temperature changes from mid 50s or 60 degrees at daybreak, up into the 70s during the day, that's typically wherever you go, that's the weather pattern that you're looking for your best chances at not only hearing birds, but being able to get them to really respond and work into calling. Because earlier on, even if they're strutting a little bit, you'll see a lot of times in February in the South and even other locations in late January, February, they're in these big flocks. They're still in their big winter flocks. And you'll see birds that gobble from time to time and they're strutting a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But they're not ever leaving that flock because they're not actually breeding and the hens are not actually leaving the flock. So they're kind of all stuck together. And it's when that weather changes again, like I said, to that springtime weather, I think my theory is what you're seeing happen there is you're finally getting that spring bloom in the wood, and that allows the hens to have better nesting habitat, and you start to see those big flocks break up, and you start to see the turkeys become much more audibly responsive because they're separated. They're not in big flocks where they can just ignore you.
Gotcha. And so that's ideal conditions there, but it sounds like from also what you're saying, if I wake up in the morning, I kind of look outside, I look outside, I see the forecast, whatever it is, and it's like, okay, it's going to be kind of gross, maybe a little bit drizzly, might be a little bit windy. It's not super warm. Yeah, it's not ideal, but there's still a good chance you're going to see turkeys moving in weather like that.
Yeah, so I think that the one thing about that comes to my mind when you kind of present that is you have to look at the way you're hunting or where you're hunting. So if you're hunting on a smaller piece of property, or even if it's not smaller, but you just kind of know the area where, like, let's say you hunt like in the Midwest, for example, where you have smaller woodlots and a lot of open fields, it's not very hard. If you put in the time to scout, you kind of know those corners of those fields where the turkeys like to be all the time. And those strut zones where the turkeys always seem to go and strut and, that kind of thing. And if you're on a smaller piece of property, obviously you're not moving around a whole lot, and the birds that are on that property, you can pretty much hear them from anywhere on the property or just about. If you're hunting that kind of situation, the spring turkey season, in kind of using that same parallel again with the whitetail rut or any deer rut, there's only a limited amount of time in these animals' world where they're going to be able to breed. So they're going to be somewhat active this time of the year, just about no matter what. Now, how easy and how much that works for your day and your situation and your ability to find them and have them respond to you and all that kind of stuff, that's a whole nother thing. But to your point, if you're hunting an area where the birds are going to be there and you don't have to worry about, well, it's so windy that I'm not going to be able to hear very far, or, it's rainy and I'm not going to really want to move around a whole lot, and you can go and get around these fields where the turkeys are going to be there, or on these small lots of property where the turkeys are going to be in there, then you're fine. Now, for the guy who's going to a large public tract of land, or even just a large piece of property where there's birds there, but you don't know exactly where they're at. And if that's the case, windy and rainy, you can't hear very far. And if you don't just get lucky enough to be close enough, it might make for a really difficult day of hunting, because in that situation, you need to be able to hear a long ways to be able to locate birds, if that makes sense. So I definitely don't think that the wind and the rain is not going to stop the toms from trying to breed the hens. much like I said, again, I'm using the same parallel in the same way that when it's time to rut and the does are going into heat, deer of every species are going to be trying to breed. Now, the weather conditions may make your hunt very difficult and hard to be successful, but they're still out there trying to breed. They're not going to stop because they only got so much time. Turkeys are the same way. And in the sense that the majority of your turkey hunting is done kind of in the simple method of go out at daylight, locate a bird, make a strategic move to set up and try to call that bird into, kill range. You just got to figure out what your situation is for your hunt. And so if you're a hunter that's hunting on a large piece of property and you don't really know where the birds are, and you're going to be really affected by high winds and rainy conditions where you may need to really move around and be able to locate a bird at distance, then, on those mornings, you're walking into a tough hunt. I'm not going to say that you can't find a bird and that bird won't work, but, it's just going to be more difficult because generally speaking, again, going back to the point, if you, unless you're going into an area and you're just kind of posting up in a known area, then, it's just going to be hard. And but I guess the spirit of your original question is, yeah, I mean, if you get up and it's rainy and drizzly and windy, don't think that the birds aren't going to be strutting and aren't going to be out trying to, find their hens and all that. They're definitely going to be doing all that. It's just a matter of how easy it's going to be on you to locate them and stay with them. Because it depends on how hardcore you are.
Oh, you know me, man. I'm the most hardcore ever. So between last year and this year, I want to present maybe some situations that I ran into in my time hunting and see kind of, I guess, either what you would do or your advice for, for someone stuck in a situation like this, mostly because I know I'm going to get stuck in these situations again. And the whole reason I run this podcast is because I want advice. So,
right.
So starting, I guess, just with this last trip, one of the things, and actually it happened a few times last year as well. I'll be sitting there. You know what? I'm even going to start earlier than that. Decoys. Do you typically run decoys or no?
Okay, so I do typically use decoys, but I do that primarily because I'm filming. I'm using, I got a camera. And the decoy, basically puts things into a situation where it makes it easier to film a hunt. If a turkey being able to see and being able to key in on movement as well as they are, it's very difficult to just call up a bird blind and, make sure that you can get the shot on camera. You put the decoys out in the open and you get the bird to come to the decoys. Well, the camera situation becomes much more simple.
Yeah, you effectively know where the birds are going to be heading. So I can imagine, it's the birds are going to go to the decoys, so you know where to point the camera effectively. And then I can imagine also with decoys that oft times, we've all seen the videos, fun stuff, interesting, exciting crap happens when turkey's coming up on either another strutting decoy or a hen decoy.
Yeah, so the decoys effectively enhance the hunt for the camera, to your point there. And then also it makes setting up, you got multiple people, you got camera equipment, and it's easier for the camera. But I don't want to say that as though there's no strategic advantage to using decoys if you're not filming a hunt. That's not my point. I use decoys when I'm not filming as well, but there are also times where not using a decoy is an advantage. So I do both. I guess to ask me that question as a hunter, just strictly forget the fact that I use them for the camera and say, as a hunter, I use them and sometimes I don't use them. I mean, to me, it's almost a 50-50 thing. There are situations that dictate it, and there are situations that certainly do not dictate it.
Now, is it typically just the ability to stay mobile and stay agile why you wouldn't want to be using decoys, or you're talking about there's some advantages?
Yeah, no, it's not that. There are times when I wish I didn't have to pack a decoy, but it's not because it's not for the hunt. It's just for convenience sake. Using a decoy in certain situations can make a bird hang up. There are a lot of situations that you could find yourself in when you're calling at a turkey and, you want to key in on that curiosity and that instinct of him coming in looking. And there are obvious situations there where if he can see your decoy from too far away, his natural instinct is for him to gobble and strut so that the hens come to him. So he's, you're running the risk of being in a situation where he's kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, he's done his part and he's going to stand there and strut on the other side of the field, waiting on that hen to come to him, and that decoy's just sitting there and he's like, well, here I am, and then there's other situations where you just got flock dynamics in play. I give you an example. I had a hunt this weekend, Sunday, where my son and I, we had a turkey roosted the evening before. We got in there really early, got close to him, and daylight breaks. He starts gobbling, and he's the only turkey that we heard that the afternoon before. He's the only turkey that we knew of that was in there. And he starts gobbling, and I have a Jake decoy and a hen decoy out, and we're in big open hardwoods there's a road that runs down the top of this ridge to the woods. So it's wood, it's timber, but it's wide open timber and a road that runs down through it. And he pitches down out of the tree, and he's out there at the end of that ridge. I don't know or think that he could see the decoys, but he was, within about 100 yards of us, and we're kind of working on him. He's gobbling, and he starts kind of going off one way or the other. Well, then another turkey starts gobbling to our right, about the same distance away, but to our right, that we didn't know was there. And that turkey's, kind of getting fired up and really getting going. And a long story short, these two birds end up meeting up with one another about 70 yards from us, just out behind our decoys, out of range. And the second turkey that started gobbling was a Jake. And when they met up, I can't claim to know the reason for this, but I can tell you from experience that it's factual. If you have a Jake decoy out and there's a longbeard that is with a Jake, he and many times, at least in my neck of the woods where I'm hunting these birds in the timber and in the south, they oftentimes won't come into a Jake decoy setup if they've got a Jake with them. Now, if they're by themselves, they'll come in there and try to beat up on that Jake. But for whatever reason, if they've got a Jake with them, they don't. I don't know what the reason for that is. But that's an example where if I had no decoys, or maybe just the hen decoy, that those birds may have came on in. But I firmly believe that because I had that Jake decoy out, they hung up out there like 60 or 70 yards and went off kind of not really straight away from us, but went away from us in general, gobbling. They weren't spooked or anything. They just kind of moved away. They didn't move into the decoys. And had I known that other turkey that started gobbling was a Jake, I would have crawled out there and got the Jake out of there. Because on the other hand, if you get a couple of toms together, they can kind of be bullies, and they'll come in and beat up on a Jake decoy for sure. But, that's just an example of a couple of scenarios. If you're hunting in the woods and you got a lot of hilly terrain and you got a lot of elevation change, and my opinion, my advice or opinion would be, probably don't use a decoy, because a lot of times if you're hunting big woods and hilly terrain, the turkeys are pretty savvy with the way especially a middle of the day bird, a bird that's not coming right off the roost and coming right in, they'll kind of do that whole thing where they stay on the back side of the ridge and pop up right there in front of you, kind of looking, and you want to play to that curiosity and not overcall so that he knows there's a bunch of calling going on somewhere he can't see see a hen, but you kind of use that instinct that he has to kind of slip around through the woods and use the hills and the sides of the ridges. He's trying to use that to his advantage. You do the same thing. You get on the backside of a ridge with the crest of the ridge in gun range, and you get him to, come looking and come seeking. And because he'll end up roaming all around you looking for that call as long as you're not calling to him too much. So that's just some of my examples of decoy versus not.
So if I do end up wanting to use decoys, what would be a good mix? Like, I guess what would be a good mix, and what, I guess, tips would you have for setting them up as far as spacing, positioning, stuff like that?
So I don't think that there's a whole lot of planning and really thought that needs to go into this. To be honest with you, I don't, and this is just me in my opinions here, but turkeys aren't that smart. They're wary and they great instincts about certain things, but they're not very smart. If you're going to do a male female dynamic, then, one gobbler or one jake and one hen is fine. If you're hunting on a field edge where you're hunting really high pressured birds, you may put a couple of hens out there to give that a couple of hen decoys to give that impression that, hey, it's just a calm feeding flock of hens and the birds feel comfortable with that. But generally speaking, you're either just going to stick a hen out there and they just, they're not going to be like, well, that's only one hen. And I swear that sounded like two hens. that they're just not that calculated of an animal. They're either going to see what they're looking for and like it and come to it or not. And then, of course, if you're in a situation where you feel like, using a gobbler or a jake decoy is going to help, then just having one of those out there with the hen. And then as far as the way you set them up, as far as the hen, you just want to stick it out there where it's in gun range and it's in the right line of sight for your setup. And then if you're going to stick a jake or whatever, you want to just position him in a situation where he's out, where it looks like he's tending that hen, where he's, standing kind of over the top of her. You kind of want to have him behind her, facing her. You also want to always try to have any male decoy, be it jake or gobbler, you want to have him facing away from where the turkey's coming, because turkeys are punks and they are much more likely to attack from the rear than they are from the front. So if he comes out in the field and a jake decoy staring right at him, he may lock up. But if he comes out in the field and it's facing away from him, he's a punk and he'll try to sneak up behind him and jump on him. That's just what they are. So that's a few things that I would say in answer to that.
Okay. So, I mean, the setup I have right now, I kind of bought a variety just to test things out. And I've got two jake decoys. One is kind of like the wiener jake decoy. And then the other one is he's kind of a puffed up strutting jake. Both of them, neither of them are too huge, teeny little beards. Mm-hmm. And then I've got two hens, one's feeding, one's standing. Obviously I probably wouldn't want to put out all four of them together. But putting out two hens and that strutting jake would work, or even just putting out that other jake with his back to where I think they'll be coming from.
Yeah, I definitely would not ever put both jakes out at the same time, because groups of jakes will almost always harass longbeards, strangers. Like, groups of jakes are real. They're a real annoyance and bother to toms, and groups of jakes will mess up if you hunt in an area like specifically in Texas or out in South Dakota where there's large flocks of turkeys. You'll have these big groups, 5, 6, 7 jakes, and they will mess your hunt up in a heartbeat. I mean, they'll run a tom clear out of your universe. So they will. I would say that in most cases, unless you had a group of toms that were kind of just running the show around there and they were stuck together and they kind of power in numbers, but I just wouldn't take that risk. I wouldn't put two jakes out. I think there's certainly some potential success in having that, a jake out there with your hen decoys, because if you get a tom or a group of toms, like a couple of them running around together, or one solo tom, and he's out by himself looking for hens, and he slips up there around your setup and he sees this Jake out there with a couple of hens, I think that there's a great chance that he'll come in and try to run that Jake off in order to take his hens from him. And then, of course, I think having a couple of hens out there, one feeding, one standing, is certainly a safe bet. I think just in most any scenario, if you're hunting in a situation where you're going into an area and you're kind of sitting in a blind, or you're just setting up somewhere and sitting for a while and calling a little bit, see if a bird starts responding or one just comes into a known area where they frequent, having a couple of hens out there for him to kind of, he hears you calling every now and then and he comes slipping around, he sees those hens and he just kind of comes on in. That's good. I think that's a safe bet. Again, the only time I think that you might not want to use a hen is if you're on a bird early at daylight and you're in a situation where he can see a long way and you're really calling hard to him and you got a lot of gobbling and responding and answering going on, and you stick that hen out there and he can see it from a long ways down a road or from across the field, and he's all fired up doing his natural thing, and he gets within eyesight of that decoy and he just locks up and starts strutting, waiting on it to come to him. Mm-hmm. That's the place where you've either got to have a strutter or a Jake to kind of cue on that dominance, or you need no decoy at all. And if you have no decoy at all, as soon as you see him, you got to shut it down. Just do very little soft calling, just enough to get him to come in gun range, because he can pick out exactly where you're at really easily. And if you're calling too much and he's not seeing what you're calling at, then he's not coming. He's going to lock up or move on.
Well, I mean, we talked about this in the last podcast. Is effectively, we're trying to get these toms to go completely against their nature, because it's not in the nature of the tom to go to the hens. It's the hens. It struts around, and the hens are supposed to come to the toms. And so with those decoys, just reiterating what you said, the likelihood of him coming in, if he's just seeing a lone or a pair of hens way off in the distance, is not very high. So you've got to figure out either a way around that, or you got to set those hens up in a space where to fully see them, he has to come within gun range. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. And I think the only thing to expand upon in that, I guess, if it hasn't been said in this conversation clearly enough, is this goes back to just kind of thinking logically. I'm going to use a kind of I don't know what you would call it, a turkey hunter terminology, but you kind of got to heat check the bird. Like like I said, if you get on a bird that's just gobbling really, really hard and he's all fired up and that he's over there strutting and gobbling and he's answering every call and you're really calling at him and all that, he's going to come, but there's a dynamic there where he's doing what he's supposed to do. And that's where you could get in trouble if you don't have that decoy kind of like around a curve or over a little hill where he's got to come find it. But on the opposite side, if you go out at 1 o'clock in the evening and you just kind of got a couple of decoys out there and you're making a few yelps and calls every few minutes here and there, nothing aggressive, you're not really calling at him, you're not keying on that instinct of his, you're just kind of in the area and he just kind of finds you on his own, well, then decoys can work really good, because he's like, oh, well, look, this is what I've been walking around looking for. I thought I heard something over here, as opposed to this hen's over there. Yep. I'm gobbling, I'm strutting. Okay, well, there she's at. She's supposed to come over here, So again, it's not really hard if you just kind of break it down for what's actually happening logically. You got to, again, that's the only way I know to say it, you got to kind of heat check your gobbler as to what you're doing. If that gobbler's really, really responding, you got to play coy with him a little bit and make him come to you. You don't want to do anything to lock him up, because if he's really hot, he's going to get to a point where he's just going to blow up and strut and almost become a zombie. He's just sitting there strutting, waiting on her to come to him.
So talking about calling, you've mentioned it a couple of times, as long as you're not calling too much, you've said it a few times. It's dependent on the situation, but that's something I struggle with, is knowing. So, say it's a fresh sit, maybe I'm hearing hearing some gobbles a little ways off in the distance, I'm set up in a good spot, ready to go. How often do I want to be calling, and how aggressive do I want to get with it? Again, of course there will be differences, as I'm using discretion as reacting to the birds, but generally to start out, like how much should I be calling?
So I'm pretty much always going by the rule of letting him tell me what to do. And what I mean by that is, so let's use the scenario that you go out before daylight, and it starts to break day, and you got a bird gobbling, and he's not right on top of you, but he's close enough for you to suspect he'll come that distance. Let's say he's within, he's 200 yards, 150, 200 yards away, something like that. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by trying to be real. So it's early in the morning. I'm going to do soft calling, tree calling, and I'm going to let him respond. If he's responding at me, I'm going to, keep giving him a little bit of what he wants to a certain point. If he's not responding a whole lot, I'm going to do a few things kind of measured to kind of try to really get his interest and get him excited and get him going. But I'm never going to really try to overdo it in the big picture. So what I mean by that is, if a turkey gobbles at daylight, and so, okay, the turkey gobbles, you make a move over there, you get, 150 yards from 100 yards, whatever the train dictates, you get there and you sit down and he's gobbling on his own a little bit, and you call to him and he doesn't respond to you, and you call to him and maybe he responds one time. So you wait a minute and you call again and he doesn't respond, and he's kind of, he hears you because he's answered you once or twice, but he's not answering you a lot. He's not focused on you, obviously. I'm going to give him some excited calling in short bursts to try to really get his attention. Once I've really got his attention, I'm really going to tone it down. Really, really tone it down. Give him a few little yelps, a few little clucks, and then go quiet for a while, and then kind of go from more tree yelps and soft yelps to a little bit more of kind of curious clucking and, semi-excited yelping kind of thing to kind of keep his attention. But I'm going to tone it really down as long as if he's cutting me off and he's gobbling like at every call I make, and he's gobbling almost like immediately, or while I'm actually calling, he's cutting me off with his gobbles, then, I'm only going to give him just enough every now and then. And then as soon as I see him, I'm not going to call anymore unless he starts walking off or something like that. Now, that's the very attentive bird. And then, so in the other situation is where the bird just kind of not answering you a whole lot, seems kind of vaguely interested. You can't just wear him out. You can't do that because that's not real. And, that's not what turkeys really do. But you can kind of give him that, hey, pay attention to me treatment a little bit. And you got to gauge it. You can do it a few times. And not every turkey's the same. You can do it a few times, and he may start gobbling at you a whole bunch more. And when he does, then you revert back into that giving him what he's giving you kind of thing. And, the other scenario where that will come into play is if you're working a bird and he's on the ground and you think, okay, any minute he could be popping up here. The last time he gobbled, he sounded like he was closing distance, and then all of a sudden he gobbles and he's moving away. You can just hammer on him for just a bit. Just give him a series of excited yelps and cut him off, cut some excited cuts and cackles and yelps in there to try to get him and say, hey, turn around and come back here. And that's something that you can do that I've had that work very well. Another thing you can try to do on a bird that seems to be kind of going away from you but still really answering you is try to cut him off a little bit. As soon as he gobbles, yelp at him, but again, it kind of goes back to, this is a trial and error kind of thing. This is a feel it, take your chance and hope you pick the right thing kind of thing. There's no exact answer, right, wrong to this, but, you just, give him what he's giving you. If he is committed to you and he's really gobbling hard at you, then you need to be real, because if you sit and listen to hens, every now and then they'll get all excited for a short period of time and cut up for a little bit, but they don't just walk through the woods yelping for 30 minutes. You know, they just don't rarely ever do that. And when they do, it's not in a situation where they're talking to a gobbler. It's in a situation where their flock has been busted up by a predator or something and they're trying to gather back up. You know, so you want to be real and like I said, if you want to be that hen that's playing hard to get, you know, you want to get his attention and do just enough to keep it until you feel like he's getting it within eyesight of you, and then just get real quiet. And everything else you do from there is very, very soft, just trying to guide him into gun range, you know, unless, again, like he turns and starts going off, you might give him a 4 or 5 note yelp and a little cut just to kind of turn him around and get him coming back your way.
Okay. So now we've kind of gone over that, getting back into kind of the situations I found myself in while I was hunting. One thing I've had happen a lot is, you know, I'll have last year it was just one hen and the one Jake. You know, this year I had the 2 hens and 1 Jake. I'll get hens to come in. I'll get, you know, 2, 3, 4 hens. Just they'll cruise in. They'll be milling about. They're hanging out, waiting for this poor Jake to step up and have his way with them, and he's clearly a limp noodle, and not doing anything because he's made of plastic. Mm-hmm. I'll be sitting around, and you know, I'll hear the occasional gobble off in the distance, and you know, they'll start to wander off because, you know, he's not doing anything, and obviously that's the last thing I want is for these hens to wander off and go find the gobbler that I want, the tom that I want to be coming in. I mean, what would you recommend what would you do in a situation like that where you're getting the hens to come in just fine, but then they start losing interest? Is it just time to move?
Well, man, I don't know that I have a real good answer. There's not a whole lot you can do because, truthfully, if you're sitting, you know, I have to assume that you're sitting within gun range of your decoys. Mm-hmm. And that being the case, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, you can't call at a hen that's within 20 or 30 yards of you and expect anything great to come of that. You may pique their attention for a minute, but they're immediately going to realize there's a sound coming from over there in that bush or that blob over there, and it's not a turkey, and that's, you know. So my initial reaction would be, if you're calling and you got a hen decoy out there and hens come up, they're probably leaving the flock and coming over there kind of territorial like, trying to run off your hen. That would be one train of thought. The other train of thought would be that you just got a whole bunch of hens. Because typically if a hen has been bred to the point where she's laying a nest or tending a nest, she's going to be by herself. She's not going to be with other hens until that, you know, at that point, she's basically dedicated to that nest. So there's not, to be honest with you, I really don't know what to tell you to do about that. I mean, it's a good thing to have turkeys in the area because those hens are eventually going to get bred by a tom, you know, or attempted to. So if they're staying in the area, he's going to be in the area too. And I think that, you know, I would just kind of chalk it up as be glad you're having activity, and you can try to just do real soft clucks and purrs to keep them calm and make them feel like, hey, everything's cool around here. These turkeys are just feeding. There's no problem. They're only going to stay around so long, and there's nothing you can really do. You probably, if I had to just place a bet on it, you probably got a lot of hens in the area, and they're part of a bigger flock, and the bigger flock is not where you are at the moment, and they're not getting any attention from the toms, so they hear you calling, and they come over there to figure out what's going on, what other turkeys these are that they're hearing.
I gotcha. Yeah,
not a great answer, but
oh no, it's an honest answer. And last year, actually, what happened is I had these. I swear it was like for a half an hour. These hens just hung out with me, and they'd wander off about 30, 40 yards, 100 yards even sometimes, and then they'd come wandering back, and they'd hang out, and they're milling about, and finally, it was just after a good half an hour, they got sick enough, and there's a little creek, and they kind of flew to the other side of the creek, and I'm watching them, and lo and behold, biggest Tom I've ever seen comes wandering out. Like,
yeah. Well, that's just the thing. Yeah, he's in the air. If they're there, he's there. That's just what it is. And they're going to him. And you just, you're going to have to hope to get in a situation where one of these days where you're out there hunting, that he's not, that he's in more of a searching mode, and he's the one that's roaming around checking out everything he hears, as opposed to kind of standing his ground and all the hens kind of coming and going to him.
Yeah.
I mean, either that or just hope you get lucky and you're on the right side of the creek one day.
I'll tell you,
flock comes.
He was just under, I think, like 60 yards away, something like that. And I was sitting there, I'm like, oh man, if I had my bow, and this was, I had my shotgun at the time, and I was like, if I had my bow with me, I could have smoked this sucker. But shotgun, I'm pretty much limited to about 30 yards, and so I moved way off to the side, because he was puffed up and strutting, his back was to me. So I moved way off to the side and tried to sneak around, and I bear crawled through the freaking creek to get at this thing. But the hens had started moving off at that point, and like I hadn't spooked them. They weren't like hustling off like you'll see them do, but they were on a mission. The hens were gone, and that gobbler was like, nope, I'm following them. I have no interest in that, like, one Jake and hen across the creek.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to get a turkey across a creek, or even a fence, or any kind of physical barrier. It's just when they're in that mode, things that they walk across and fly across on a normal travel route every day, they just won't do for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason for that is, but it is kind of universal in most everywhere I've hunted, that if you get a bird gobbling and strutting, and there's something between you, not something that he physically can't handle, but just something that prevents him from just simply walking straight over to you, he'll just hang up on it and just wait on you. I don't know if that's just God's way of one of the ways that they're designed that protects them, from just walking up on anything. Mm-hmm. But man, creeks can end a lot of hunts.
Yeah, it's tough too, because it's right in a spot where I've seen them just as much on both sides of the creek. So it's really just, it's a complete crapshoot when I go to set up in that spot. I'm like, well, let's roll the dice and see if I want to be on the east side or the west side of the creek today. And so far, my choices have been incorrect.
my opinion to you would be, take one hen decoy, go in there at daylight or whenever you're going to hunt, slip into the area and try to get the bird to gobble so that you know where he's at, and then get on that side of the creek with him and try to make a setup on him and call him in. That way you're not rolling that 50-50 dice of, okay, I'm putting all my eggs in this setup and I'm hoping that he's on this side with me. If that's the case and he's always there, you should be able to hear him at daylight, or if you're going mid-morning or something, you get in there and do some locating calls and get him to gobble and say, okay, I know where he's at. And so let me try to get within about 100 of him, stick this hen out there and call to him and see if I can get him to come to me.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I struggle with is I still don't have a ton of experience out chasing turkeys. And so learning to locate, I can get a general direction from a gobble, but, kind of figuring out how far away they are and exactly where pinpointing exactly where that's coming from is still a skill I'm learning. And so I'm working on that, but I do need to, I think, make one thing you gave me was in the last podcast that I think I need to make more use of, just coming in if they're not gobbling, is getting into that spot in the morning and using that hoot owl call I picked up.
Oh, absolutely. Well, but to be honest, man, if that's certainly something that you can do, but if there's, and it sounds like from talking to you and following along with your ride, the ride you've been on with all this, it sounds to me like there's plenty of birds in the area. And, if that's the case, you can probably just go out there and stand there and listen. They're going to gobble on their own. You don't have to make them gobble.
Mm-hmm.
If he's out there strutting and breeding hens, when it starts breaking daylight, he's going to start gobbling to let all the hens know where he's at and what his plans are for the morning, and then you're standing there in the dark or daybreak and the bird's gobbling and you're like, okay, not only do I know where he's at or the direction he's at, but he's in a tree. So he's not moving. So between now, even you got a amount of time there, obviously, before he's going to fly down, but you've got time there where he's not going anywhere. He's going to sit up there until there's, good on the ground, most likely, before he flies down. So when you hear that first gobble or you hear a few and you get a waypoint on him, just move towards him until you get close enough where okay, I know exactly about how far he is and about where he's at. And so let me get in here and get set up on him. And you don't ever have to make a sound. He doesn't have to know you're in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What, again, terrain will play a huge role in this, but, say I'm in a lightly wooded area. It's, there's cover, there's plenty of brush and bushes and trees, but it's fairly open. I can make my way through it. How far off should I reasonably be setting up? And I have a feeling the answer is going to be something like as close as you can without them seeing you. Yeah. But if you're crunching through leaves and stuff like that, how far off should I be expecting to set up from and still be able to call in a tom like that?
Well, it varies, man. It really varies. And without really knowing your situation now, a few points to make in response to that, because I really can't say, because the area you're in, the amount of turkeys you have, the point in the season you're hunting, all play a big role. So, as an example of that, early season in Mississippi, when the birds are still have a lot of hens. When I get a bird gobbling early in the morning, I'm going to get as close as I possibly can to him. And the reason is I want him to fly down and come check me out before he gets to those hens, because I know that once he gets to those hens, not only am I not going to be able to call him away from them most likely, but I'm not even going to know where he's at, because he's not going to gobble anymore. He's just going to strut as big as he can all day long, waiting on those hens to let him breed. And so early in the season, he's going to gobble pretty good at daylight. And then, by 30 minutes, hour and a half, maybe after sunup, he's done. He's probably not going to gobble much at all the rest of the day. And if you're hunting in wooded terrain where you don't have fields and stuff like that, he can just disappear on you because he's not gobbling. And the more you walk around, the more likely you are to just scare him off. So I'm going to get as close as I can. Because, like I said, not my only chance. There's an exception to every rule. I'm not ignoring that. But generally speaking, using statistics to my advantage here, my highest percentage of success is to kill him before he gets to his hens. And so I'm going to get as close as I can, so that when his feet hit the ground, he is very close. Like within 100 yards of me, so that all I got to do is convince him to come a little ways and be in gun range. As the season gets later and I realize that there's not a lot of hens around, he might be all by himself looking for more hens. I'm still going to try to get fairly close to him, but I don't have to. I don't have that worry in my mind. I know that if I really get his attention, he might come to me because he's looking for hens. That's why he's up there gobbling his brains out at daylight. Mm-hmm. And then the situation where how many gobblers are around? Is there a lot of competition? Because if there's 5 or 6 turkeys gobbling, you're probably going to get one of them to come to you, because they're not all going to go to the hens without getting a big old fight.
Yeah.
So, but generally speaking, I think if you can use that 100 yards given line of sight, meaning, you only get so close without risking being seen in your terrain. If you're in big timber, big hardwood, you know, you can get pretty close. If it's a field that you got to be in the open, you know, you might not need to get quite as close. If you're hunting an area where your scouting is to your advantage and you kind of know what they're very likely to do, if they are limited, let's just say by water or by just simply open ground, where they pretty much, if they fly down this direction, they kind of got to eventually filter through this area. Well, then you can kind of sit back and use, you know, the kind of techniques you would use when you were trying to hunt a funnel on traveling deer, and say, hey, all I got to do is call him into gun range within this limited area where they always kind of pass through here after they fly down. If you're in a situation like I'm in most of the time, where it's thousands of acres of timber, they can go any direction they want. Well, then I'm going to try to get close in an advantageous situation so that when his feet hit the ground, I'm the first hen yelping at him and try to get him over there to me.
All right. So are there any, as we're winding down, are there any final tips that or encouragement you might have for me for my second official spring turkey season?
Well, the best thing that I can say, I think, is you got to be willing to mess up in order to learn enough to kind of move forward in your progression as a turkey hunter. And when I say that, I mean, you got to go out there at daylight and say, I'm not sitting in a blind today. You know, I'm not sitting in a blind and I'm not taking a decoy. I'm going to take my call and my shotgun and my camo, and I'm going to go out there where I can hear the area I'm hunting. And when a turkey gobbles, I'm going to see how close I can get to him and sit down, and I'm going to try to call that turkey in gun range. And if you get too close and you spook him off the limb, well, then you've learned something. If you call him up and he doesn't get close enough because there's not a decoy out there, well, then you learn something. If you call him up and he comes in behind you because that decoy's not there to pull him around in front of you, then you learn something. And then, of course, if you do it all right and he comes right up in your lap and you kill him, then you really learned something. But, you know, to your point about, you know, learning what it sounds like, and I don't think it's a skill. I don't think it's something you got to get better at. It's just something you have to experience. So learning what it sounds like when a turkey's 400 yards away on a windy day, or when a turkey is only 100 yards away, but he's on the other side of a hill, or, you know, what's the difference in, you know, a turkey that's gobbling facing the other direction as opposed to a turkey that's gobbling facing your direction. And how do I know? I've listened to this turkey gobble 7 or 8 times, and, you know, what are these different, you know, what can I make of this? When I hear this, you know, I can tell you if I'm standing in the woods with you at daylight and I hear this, we know it's the same turkey, but the sound keeps changing. I can almost tell you, well, he's walking up and down a limb. He's gobbling away from us sometimes. That's why he sounds, you know, I've hunted with a lot of people that, you know, that hadn't had as much hunting experience as me, and that turkey's already on the ground. I'm like, no, he's not. He's in the tree. He sounds different because he's walking up and down the limb, and he's gobbling left and he's gobbling right, and he's trying to get everything's attention. You know, when he gobbles at us, he's turning and facing us, and it sounds like he's right on top of us. And then sometimes he gobbles and it echoes down this creek bottom, and it sounds like he's already flown down and he's, you know, 200 yards the other direction. And then he turns around and gobbles again, and he's right back in the same spot. You know, learning what all those sounds are and figuring them out, and then also learning how to just figure out where the right place to get. You know, when you get in that zone, I know I'm within a couple hundred yards of this bird. I know I can't really go any closer because the terrain opens up. So how do I need to set up? What do I need to look at here for me to think, okay, this is the kind of spot where if I, you know, get this bird's attention, he'll come into this area looking for a hen. What do those spots look like? The only way to figure that out is to just do it and try to learn from it. When a bird hangs up, or when you do something stupid and spook the bird, you just figure out what you did wrong and put it in that bank of knowledge. Experience is all you need, truthfully, because there's not a list of things that are answers that are going to turn the tides. It's just experience. And sometimes that experience comes in the way of success. But as you probably well know, in life, most of the time, our best experiences come in failure. You know, And so you can't be afraid to just try different things. And if there's something that you're not really understanding, I know you, Sam, you're good at being vulnerable. You put yourself in a vulnerable situation. Say, I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but I know everybody keeps telling me I need to do this. So I'm fixing to go out there and do it and see if it kills me a turkey or not. And then if it does, great. If it doesn't, I'll learn something from it. You know, I just think that needs to be your approach.
Well, that is, as best I can, the approach I'm taking with it. And I hope everyone here listening will also do their best. I know I've had a couple of buddies mention that they're turkey hunting for the first time this year. I think the quarantine is finally getting to them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I will be sending them this episode when it comes out for sure. So just to remind the folks, where can they find you and T3 and Strutcast, all the good stuff online?
Yeah, so the stuff I'm into, I'm the host of Strutcast, which is just a spring turkey hunting podcast. I do it once a week, just during the spring. I usually go from late February, early March, through the end of May, and it's just all dedicated to spring turkey hunting. And you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can go to strutcast.com. I hope you'll go to strutcast.com and check out all the media, and you can listen to the episodes there. But at the same time, you can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, just everywhere that podcasts are available. And then, you know, as far as myself, I'm the owner and operator of Life and Focus Media, and really, I'm mostly what I do is I'm kind of the whitetail and turkey hunting content developer for Scree Gear. So that's SKRE, and it's a performance-based layering system, you know, camo clothes and gear. And so you'll find a lot of my stuff, content, video, photo, blogs, articles and stuff with Scree. And then, you know, T3 calls, we're a custom call maker, focused mostly on turkey, but we also do some deer and waterfowl calls. So, you know, if you're looking me up, my name is Locke Wheeler, and it's spelled with an E, so it's Locke, and you can search Locke Wheeler on Instagram or Facebook and find me. And then, of course, T3 Calls and Scree Gear, you'll find me on those places. And then, of course, I hope you'll all go check out Strutcast. We're in season 2, about 3 or 4 episodes in. We've had some pretty cool guests last year and starting off this year. And it's been tough because this coronavirus and this quarantine thing is making the season very difficult. I've already had 3 or 4 trips canceled, and I honestly don't really expect to take any of my out-of-state trips this year, and I usually go on 6 or 7. So I'm going to be relocated to hunting right here in Louisiana and Mississippi, and that's going to cut down on my content big time. But, you know, we all got to stay safe and see this through, and hope everybody else is doing that as well. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep, you know, banging out those Strutcast episodes, and hope people will follow along with that. We'll be bringing as much good, entertaining, and informative turkey content as we can throughout the spring.
Oh, yeah, man. Well, I will make sure to link to that on the show notes page. Appreciate you hopping on the line. It was good chatting with you again, bud.
Yep. Thanks, man.
All right, y'all, that'll do it for this episode of The Wild Initiative. Make sure to check out the show notes page at thewildinitiative.com. Get links to everything we talked about in today's episode. That'll do it for this week. I hope this episode inspired you to get involved, get outdoors, and plan your initiative for the wild.
Thank you for listening to The Wild Initiative. Please take a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher, and head on over to thewildinitiative.com to get show notes, check out the blog, gear discounts, other podcasts from the Wild Initiative family, and more.